himself within as the supersoul and without as time. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Here it is stated that within the heart, the Supreme Personality of Godhead resides as the Supersoul. This situation is also explained in Bhagavad Gita. The Supersoul rests beside the individual soul and acts as a witness. This is also confirmed elsewhere in Vedic literature. Two birds are sitting on the same tree of the body. One is witnessing and the other is eating the fruits of the tree. This Purusha or Paramatma, who resides within the body of the individual soul, is described in Bhagavad Gita 13:23 as the Upadrasta, the witness, and the Anumanta, sanctioning authority. The conditioned soul engages in the happiness and distress of the particular body given him by the arrangement of the external energy of the Supreme Lord. But the Supreme Living Being, or the Paramatma, is different from the conditioned soul. He is described in Bhagavad Gita as Maheshwara, or the Supreme Lord. He is Paramatma, not Jivatma. Paramatma means the super soul, who is sitting by the side of the conditioned soul, just to sanction his activity. The conditioned soul comes to this material world in order to lord it over material nature. Since one cannot do anything without the sanction of the Supreme Lord, he lives with the Jiva soul as witness and sanction giver. He is also Bhokta. He gives maintenance and sustenance to the conditioned soul. Since the living entity is constitutionally part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Lord is very affectionate to the living entity. Unfortunately, when the living entity is bewildered or illusioned by the external energy, he becomes forgetful of his eternal relationship with the Lord. But as soon as he becomes aware of his constitutional condition, he is liberated. The minute independence of the conditioned soul is exhibited by his marginal position. If he likes, he can forget the Supreme Personality of God and come into the material existence with a false ego to lord it over material nature. But if he likes, he can turn his face to the service of the Lord. The individual living entity is given that independence. His conditional life is ended, and his life becomes successful as soon as he turns his face to the Lord. But by misusing his independence, he enters into material existence. Yet the Lord is so kind that as super soul, he always remains with the conditioned soul. The concern of the Lord is neither to enjoy nor to suffer from the material body. He remains with the jiva simply as sanction giver and witness, so that the living entity can receive the result of his activities, good or bad. Outside the body of the conditioned soul, the Supreme Personality of Godhead remains as the time factor. According to the Sankhya system of philosophy, there are 25 elements. The 24 elements already described, plus the time factor, make 25. According to some learned philosophers, the super souls included to make a total of 26 elements. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Okay, so a lot of information in this purport today. The verse is Anta Purusha Rupena Kala Rupena Yogahi Samanviti Satvanam Bhagavan Atmamaya. Okay, Atmamaya means uh, the different potencies that a living entity has. So the translation is by exhibiting his potencies. The Supreme Personality of Godhead adjusts all these different elements, keeping himself within as the super soul and without as time. So Krishna is within everything and is also without everything. Without meaning he's also in everything and outside of everything. So he's in everything as the super soul and he's without everything or is out of everything as time. So it says that there is a super soul in the heart of every living entity. And the super soul rests besides the individual soul and acts as a witness. That's for everyone. This is also confirmed elsewhere in the Vedic literature. Two birds are sitting on the same tree of the body. One is witnessing, and the other is eating fruits of the tree. Yeah, so one bird is the super soul, and the other bird is the living entity. So when the living entity pays attention to the super soul and is no longer, let's say, overwhelmed by eating the fruits of the tree, then he becomes a devotee. But if one is only eating the fruits of the tree and ignoring the super soul who's right next to him, then he's in a state of Maya. Mm-hmm. Or it's like two birds, one is that are sitting on the same tree of the body. One is witnessing, and the other is eating the fruits of the tree. This Purusha or Paramatma who resides within the body of the individual soul is described in Bhagavad Gita 13:23 as the Upadrashta. Drashta means the Upadrashta means that he is the witness, and Anumanta, the sanctioning authority. Well, sanctioning authority is Krishna, and Upadrashta is the witness. The conditioned soul engages in the happiness and distress of the particular body given him by the arrangement of the external energy of the Supreme Lord. But the Supreme Living Being, or the Paramatma, is different from the conditioned soul. He, meaning the Paramatma, is described in Bhagavad Gita as Maheshwara, or the Supreme Lord. He is Paramatma, not Jiva. Paramatma means the super soul, who is sitting by the side of the conditioned soul, just to sanction his activity. Okay, now this word sanction has different meanings. Let's look up the word sanction. It can mean permitting, or it can mean punishing. It has different meanings. You have to understand by the context how they're using the word. So in this context, sanction means permitting someone to do something. Another meaning is, one is prohibited from doing something.
It has either positive meaning or negative meaning. Positive meaning is where sanction refers to either official approval or permission for an action. And then negative meaning is where sanction can refer to a penalty or
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it has those two meanings. So it says here, let's see where we are.
First paragraph. Middle of the first paragraph.
So it gives the example here that two birds are sitting on the same tree of the body. One is witnessing, and the other is eating the fruits of the tree. So the witnesser is Krishna, and the one who's eating the fruits of the tree is the living entity. This Purusha or Paramatma who resides within the body of the individual soul is described in Bhagavad Gita 13:23 as the Upadrashta. Drashta means to see. Upadrashta means uh, being the witness. And Anumanta also is another way of referring. Means the sanctioning authority. Now, the word sanction has, like we said, different meanings, but here it's talking about the one who gives, one who is permitting someone to act. But it can also mean one who is being punished. The conditioned soul engages in happiness and distress of the particular body given him by the arrangement of the external energy of the Supreme Lord. But the Supreme Living Being, or the Paramatma, is different from the conditioned soul. He is described in Bhagavad Gita as Mahesh. So Ishvara means the controller, and Maheshwara means the supreme controller. Is the Bhagavad Gita as Maheshwara, or the Supreme Lord. He is Paramatma, not Jiva. Paramatma means the super soul, who is sitting by the side of the conditioned soul, just to sanction his activities. So sanction also has two meanings, but here is to permit his activities. But it could also mean suffering or punishing. The conditioned soul comes to this material world in order to lord it over material nature. Since one cannot do anything without the sanction of the Supreme Lord, in this case, sanction means permission of the Supreme Lord, he lives with the Jiva soul as witness and sanction giver. So, and this and the sanction giver means giving, permitting the soul. He is also bhukta. He gives maintenance and sustenance to the conditioned soul. Since the living entity is constitutionally part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Lord is very affectionate to the living entity. Unfortunately, when the living entity is bewildered or illusioned by the external energy, he becomes forgetful of his eternal relationship with the Lord. But as soon as he becomes aware of his constitutional position, he is liberated. What's the constitutional position? See, that word constitutional is very important. Constitutional position means the real position of a person. And what is the real position of a person? He's always subordinate to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He has come from the Spirit, and he's part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So his constitutional position is to serve the Lord. That's what he is meant to do. Now, most people forget that, and therefore, if they don't engage in the service of the Lord, they unnecessarily suffer. Okay, so unfortunately, when the living entity is bewildered or illusioned by the external energy, that means by eating, sleeping, mating, and defending and avoiding Krishna consciousness, he becomes forgetful of his eternal relationship with the Lord. Eternal relationship means that who you are eternally, what is your real constitutional position. But when one becomes forgetful of his eternal relationship with the Lord, but as soon as he becomes aware of his constitutional position, he is liberated. That's the whole purpose of education, spiritual education, to become aware of our constitutional position. Constitutional means who we really are and what we're really supposed to do. Then he is liberated. The minute independence of the conditioned soul is exhibited by his marginal position. Marginal means in the middle. He can go both ways. Either he can become a nonsense person and engage in sense gratification, or he becomes really serious and follows Krishna consciousness. If he likes, he can forget the Supreme Personality of Godhead and come into the material existence with a false ego to lord it over material nature. But if he likes, he can turn his face to the service of the Lord. The individual living entity is given that independence. Yeah, so there's two possibilities for the living entity. Either he surrenders to the Lord or he ignores the Lord and becomes a sense gratifier and comes completely under the control of Maya. The individual living entity is given, it says, if he likes, he can forget the Supreme Personality of Godhead and come into the material existence with a false ego to lord it over material nature. But if he likes, he can turn his face to the service of the Lord. The individual living, that's why it gives the example of two birds. One is the witness, and the other is the jiva, who is tasting all the fruits of material life. But when the jiva becomes conscious of the witness or the Supreme Personality Godhead, then he may become a devotee. The individual living entities give, okay, so it says, if he likes, he can forget the Supreme Personality of Godhead and come into the material existence with a false ego to lord it over material nature. But if he likes, he can turn his face to the service of the Lord. The individual living entity is given that independence. Okay, so that is the limited freedom or limited independence of the living entity. We can either choose to serve Krishna or ignore Krishna. The individual living entity is given that independence. His conditional life is ended and his life becomes successful as soon as he turns his faith to the Lord. But by misusing his independence, he enters into material existence. Well, most people in the material world, if not all, have turned their face against the Lord or away from the Lord, and by misusing their independence. And therefore, they enter into the material existence. Yet the Lord is so kind that as super soul, he always remains with the conditioned soul. The concern of the Lord is neither to enjoy nor to suffer from the material body. He remains with the jiva simply as sanction giver and witness so that the living entity can receive the results of his activities, good or bad. Okay, so Krishna is always with us. He never, let's say, quits the proximity of the jiva. So that's the good news. The bad news is one can become, one can lose the interest in the Supreme Personality Godhead's presence and live a complete materialistic life and become completely a victim of Maya. Outside the body of the conditioned soul, the Supreme Personality of Godhead remains as the time factor. So, Krishna is present in the living entity as the super soul, and he is outside of the living entity as the time factor. According to the Sankhya system of philosophy, there are 25 elements. The 24 elements already described, plus the time factor, make 25. The time factor is actually Krishna, and it controls the living entity. According to some learned philosophers, the super soul is included to make a total of 26 elements. Okay, so now that is Sankhya philosophy. It's explaining the different aspects of the living entity. So sometimes it's 24 elements, sometimes it's 25 elements, or uh, uh, okay. So according to some learned philosophers, the super soul is included to make a total of 26 elements. So it can be 24, 25, or 26.
It doesn't include Jivatma, right, Maharaj, in this 25, 26? Okay.
Why would you say it doesn't include Jiva?
Because super, we only accounted for all the material elements are 24. Then there is time, then there is super soul. Then there is Jivatma.
Well, if you say that super soul is included to make 26 elements, the 25th element, then it's the Jiva.
No, I mean, in this case, time is counted as 24 plus time factor makes it 25. 25 material elements, then we should have Jivatma and Paramatma.
Yeah, so Jivatma has to be counted as one.
So then that should make it 27. That's fine.
Let's see here. Well, let's hold our
Yeah, I'm sure there will be reference to it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, it says according to the Sankhya system of philosophy, there are 25 elements. 24 elements already described, plus the time factor make 25. According to some learned philosophers, the supersoul is included to make a total of 26 elements. All right, well, let's read on.
Yeah.
Text 19. After the Supreme Personality Godhead impregnates material nature and his internal potency, material nature delivers the sum total of the cosmic intelligence, which is known as Hiranmaya. This takes place in material nature when she is agitated by the destination of the conditioned purport by Srila Prabhupada. This impregnation of material nature is described in Bhagavad Gita, 14th chapter, verse number 3. Material nature's primal factor is the Mahatattva, or breeding source of all varieties. Breeding means it's it's where things are growing or coming into existence. This part of material, okay, once you look it up, breeding. This part of material nature, which is called pradhana, as well as Brahman, is impregnated by the Supreme Personality of Godhead and delivers varieties of living entities. Material nature in this connection is called Brahman because it is perverted, a perverted reflection of the spiritual nature. Oh, so that's interesting. It says that the Brahman is a perverted reflection of the spiritual nature. It is described in Vishnu Purana that the living entities belong to the spiritual nature. The potency of the Supreme Lord is spiritual, and the living entities, although they are called marginal potency, are also spiritual. If the living entities were not spiritual, this description of impregnation by the Supreme Lord would not be. Okay, so the living entity is always spiritual. The Supreme Lord does not put his demon into that which is not spiritual. But it is stated here that the Supreme Person puts his demon into material nature. This means that the living entities are spiritual by nature. After impregnation, the living nature delivers all kinds of living entities, beginning from the greatest living creature, Lord Brahma, down to the insignificant ant in all varieties of forms. In Bhagavad Gita 14.4, material nature is clearly mentioned as sarva yonis. This means that of all material nature,
Of all varieties.
this means that of all varieties of species, demigods, human beings, animals, birds, and beasts, whatever is manifest, material nature is the mother, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the seed-giving father. Generally, it is experienced that the father gives life to the child, but the mother gives its body. Although the seed of life is given by the father, the body develops within the womb of the mother. Similarly, the spiritual living entities are impregnated into the womb of material nature by the body, being supplied by material nature.
But the
Let me read that. Similarly, the supreme living entity.
the spiritual.
I'm sorry. Similarly, the spiritual living entities are impregnated into the womb of material nature, but the body, being supplied by material nature, takes on many different species and forms of life. The theory that symptoms of life are manifest by the interaction of the 24 material elements is not supported here. The living force comes directly from the Supreme Personality of Godhead and is completely spiritual. Therefore, no material scientific advancement can produce life. The living force comes from the spiritual world and has nothing to do with the interaction of the material elements. Yeah, so the soul, and I mean, there are some scientists and some speculators say that the soul is produced uh, like anything else material by the combination of material elements at a certain point. That is not true. The soul is part and parcel of Krishna, the supreme personality of Godhead. It is not a product of combination of material elements, as the atheists propose. Okay, well, let me just read the translation again in verse 19. After the Supreme Personality of Godhead impregnates material nature, but how does he impregnate? Simply by seeing. It's not like, impregnates like, the husband impregnates the wife with his semen. The Supreme Personality of Godhead doesn't have to do something like that. He can do things just by seeing. So after the Supreme Personality of Godhead impregnates material nature with this internal potency, now that potency is internal, meaning it's a spiritual potency. Material nature delivers the sum total of the cosmic intelligence, which is known as Hiranmaya. The material nature delivers the sum total of the cosmic intelligence, which is known as Hiranmaya. This takes place in material nature when she is agitated by the destinations of the conditioned soul. Well, destination of the conditioned soul that is referring to their karma.
Mm-hmm.
Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The impregnation of material nature is described in Bhagavad Gita, 14th chapter, verse 3. Material nature's primal factor is the Mahatattva, or breeding source of all varieties. This part of material nature, which is called Pradhana as well as Brahman, is impregnated by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so Pradhana is the existence of the living entity right before uh, it becomes visible. Okay. So this part of material nature, which is called Pradhana as well as Brahman, is impregnated by the Supreme Personality of Godhead and delivers varieties of living entities. Okay, now that's a very profound statement. Basically, it's saying that the living entity is not a combination of material nature or material elements. It is something completely spiritual. So it's not as the scientists say, well, at a certain point, the soul is created by a combination of material elements. No, it's not true. And therefore it says that material nature's primal factor is the Mahatattva, or breeding source of all varieties. So breeding means creating or coming to life, source of all varieties. This part of material nature, which is called Pradhana as well as Brahman, is impregnated by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is the unseen factor, the impregnation of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's not something, therefore the soul is not material. It is something spiritual. It's not created by a combination of material elements. The scientists want to prove that if there is a soul, it's something that's developed by combination of material elements. But here it's very clearly saying that the soul has nothing to do with the combination of material elements, something spiritual. And it's something that is eternal, meaning that it has no beginning and no end. It's not that the soul comes into existence at a certain point because of the combination of material elements. The soul is eternal in the past, in the present, in the future. It's not that the soul begins to exist at a certain point, because if it did, then it would also end at a certain point. But the soul is eternal because it's coming from Krishna, part and parcel of Krishna. So therefore it says, the impregnation of material nature is described in Bhagavad Gita, 14th chapter, verse 3. 14th chapter. You have the 14th chapter, verse 3 in this book.
Yeah.
Um, it goes,
No, this is Bhagavad Gita, you need.
yeah, okay.
You need that?
The impregnation of material nature is described in Bhagavad Gita, 14th chapter, verse 3. Yeah, let's see what it says. You see, these are all subtle things, the impregnation of material nature. And who is able to see that? I don't think any of us is able. All right. Okay, so looking at text 3, Mama Yunir Mahat Brahma Tasmin Garbam Tadam Yaham Sambhava Sarvabhutam Tatu Bhavati Bharata. The total material substance called Brahman is the source of birth, and it is that Brahman that I impregnate, making possible the births of all living beings. Purport. This is an explanation of the world. Everything that takes place is due to the combination of Chetra and Chetragya, the body and the spirit soul. This combination of material nature and the living entity is made possible by the Supreme God Himself. The Mahatattva is the total cause of the total cosmic manifestation. And that total substance of the material cause, in which there are three modes of nature, is sometimes called Brahman. The Supreme Personality impregnates that total substance, and thus innumerable universes become possible. This total material substance, the Mahatattva, is described as Brahman in the Vedic literature, Mundaka Upanishad 1.1.9. Tasmat itad Brahma, nama rupam anam shajayate. The Supreme Person impregnates that Brahman with the seeds of the living entity. The 24 elements, beginning from earth, water, fire, and air, are all material energy, and they constitute what is called Mahat Brahma, or the great Brahma, the material nature. As explained in the 7th chapter, beyond this, there is another superior nature, the living entity. Into material nature, the superior nature is mixed by the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And thereafter, all living entities are born of this material nature. The scorpion lays its eggs in piles of rice, and sometimes it is said that the scorpion is born out of rice. But the rice is not the cause of the scorpion. Actually, the eggs were laid by the mother. Similarly, material nature is not the cause of the birth of the living entities. Okay, so that's a very, very profound statement. The scientists are hell bent on maintaining that This, if there is a soul, it is created by the material nature at a certain point of time. That is the truth. That's false. So it says, um, um, into material nature, the superior nature is mixed by the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And thereafter, all living entities are born of this material nature. But this is a subtle thing. It is not a gross thing. Whenever you use the word subtle, it means you can't really see it, but it actually happens. The scorpion lays its eggs in piles of rice. And sometimes it is said that the scorpion is born out of rice. But the rice is not the cause of the scorpion. Actually, the eggs were laid by the mother. Similarly, material nature is not the cause of the birth of the living entities. Right there is a very profound statement because when you read books by scientists about the origin of a living entity, they refer to it in terms of material combination of elements. They don't talk about the soul. But here, the soul is eternal, it's not temporary, and it's not created by any combination of material elements. And that's why he's giving this example of the scorpion lays its eggs uh, in the rice paddy. But the rice is not the cause of the scorpion. Actually, the eggs were laid by the mother. Similarly, material nature is not the cause of the birth of living entities. The seed is given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they only seem to come out as products of material nature. Thus, every living entity, according to its past, okay, this would mean that it's not the physical connection of a man and woman that gives birth to a living entity. The living entity is impregnated into the body of the mother by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's not simply the sperm that creates a living entity. At a certain point, in a mysterious way, the sperm is impregnated with living entity by Krishna himself. The father is simply a conduit, but not the source of that soul that's impregnated into the body of the mother. Thus, every living entity, according to its past activity, is different. Similarly, material nature is not the cause of the birth of the living entity. The seed is given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they only seem to come out as products of the material nature. Thus, every living entity, according to his past activities, has a different body created by his material nature, meaning karma, so that the entity can enjoy or suffer according to his past deed. The Lord is the cause of all the manifestations of living entities in this material world. Well, that means there's a lot of unseen, subtle things that are happening in this world. And we are able to see, let's say, the 24 material elements, earth, water, fire, air, and so forth. But there are other things that are even more important that we don't see, such as the soul and how the soul is impregnated in the material world, in existence in the material world. So it says it says that the 24 elements, beginning from earth, water, fire, and air, are all material energy, and they constitute what is called Mahad Brahma, or the great Brahman, the material nature. As explained in the 7th chapter, beyond this, there is another superior nature, the living entity. Into material nature, the superior nature is mixed by the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And thereafter, all living entities are born of this material nature. So that spiritual nature is impregnated or mixed by the will of the Lord with the material nature. And because of that, all living entities are born seemingly from material nature, but actually it's not. The scorpion lays its eggs in piles of rice, and sometimes it is said that the scorpion is born out of rice, but the rice is not the cause of the scorpion. Actually, the eggs were laid by the mother, but we don't see that, right? The mother goes into the uh, water where the and then lays her eggs in the water in the rice paddies, right? So we might see her going into the water, but we don't see her producing the eggs in the paddy of the water. Similarly, material nature is not the cause. So if we think that the rice paddy is the cause of the little scorpions that seem to come from the rice paddy, it's not true. It's the eggs that were laid in the rice paddy by the mother scorpion, but we don't see that. Actually, the eggs were laid by the mother. Similarly, material nature is not the cause or the birth of the living entities. The seed is given by the Supreme Personality of God, and they only seem to come out as products of material nature. Thus, every living entity, according to his past activities, has a different body created by his material nature. By this material nature, so that the entity can enjoy or suffer according to his past deeds, meaning karma. The Lord is the cause of all manifestations of living entities in this material world. Okay, so this is a real explanation of how living entities come into existence in the material world. But it's not by combination of material elements. It looks like, but it's not. The living entities are impregnated by the Supreme Lord in the 24 elements of material nature. But the living entity is not made of material combination. It is completely spiritual. This is all confusing for people to understand. Okay, so let's read a little bit more again. So it says, the Supreme Person impregnates that Brahman, meaning the material nature, with the seeds of a living entity. Is this something that people see? No, they don't see it. The 24 elements, beginning from earth, water, fire, and air, are all material energy, and they constitute what is called Mahad Brahma, or the great Brahman. That means the material energy. As explained in the 7th chapter, beyond this, meaning beyond all the material energies, the material nature So beyond this, there is another superior nature, the living entity. Into material nature, the superior nature is mixed by the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And thereafter, all living entities are born of this material nature. So, the living entities are spiritual. They're not made by the combination of material elements. Although it may look like that, but we do not see the subtle way that the material nature is impregnated by the Lord with living entities. All we see is that it looks like material entities are coming from material nature. And the example of the scorpion is given. All people see is that the scorpion is coming out of the water. They didn't see the mother scorpion lay her eggs in the water. So all they see is at one point, scorpions are coming out from the water. So they think that the water is the source of the little baby scorpions. But no, they didn't see the mother go into the water at one point and lay the eggs and then leave and meditate from a distance that those eggs will hatch and give the existence of baby scorpion. All this is subtle. Okay, so the scorpion lays its eggs in piles of, and sometimes it is said that the scorpion is born out of rice. But the rice is not the cause of the scorpion. Actually, the eggs were laid by the mother. Similarly, material nature is not the cause of the birth of the living entity. The seed is given by the Supreme Personality of God, and they only seem to come out as products of material nature. Thus, every living entity, according to its past activities, has a different body created by this material nature, so that the entity can enjoy or suffer according to the past deed. The Lord is the cause of all manifestations, living entities in this material world. Okay, so the subtle way that the soul enters into the body of a living entity is not understood. Of course, the explanation is, well, it's from the sperm of the husband that impregnates the wife and then it gives birth to a living entity. Actually, that's not true. What is the truth? The truth is that the living entity is impregnated by the Lord into the womb of the mother. It's not the husband that does that. It looks like the husband, but it's not. Therefore, it says in the next verse, Sarvayoni Sukonteya, Murtaya Sambhavantiya, Tasam Brahma Mahad Yonir Ham Vichapadapita. It should be understood that all species of life, O son of Kunti, are made possible by birth in this material nature, and that I am the seed-giving father. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In this verse, it is clearly explained that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the original father of all living entities. The living entities are combinations of the material nature and the spiritual nature. Such living entities are seen not only on this planet, but on every planet, even on the highest, where Brahma is situated. Everywhere there are living entities. Within the earth, there are living entities, even within water and within fire. All these appearances are due to the mother, material nature, and Krishna's seed-giving process. The purport is that the material world is impregnated. Living entities come out in various forms at the time of creation according to their past deeds. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. What we don't understand is that Krishna is the seed-giving father of all living entities. It's not the mundane father. It's the Supreme Personality, Godhead, who's the seed-giving father of all living entities. So we'll continue tomorrow and go over these verses a little bit more. Are there any questions? Well, I don't think there are any questions because everybody left. Are there any questions? Okay, no questions, no answers. So we'll stop there and continue tomorrow. And we'll stop on verse number 4. Yeah, okay, go ahead.